Order, please. The subject matter for daily routine before we start that is the late debate. Topic, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly condemn the NDP for telling Nova Scotians the budget was balanced despite extensive evidence to the contrary. Submitted by the Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes. So before we start the daily routine this afternoon, I'm going to do a speaker's ruling. On Wednesday, March the 27th, 2013, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition rose on a point of privilege, alleging that in delivering the government's budget to the House last year on April the 3rd, 2012, the Minister of Finance had deliberately misled the House by tabling a budget that contained information that was incorrect, and by stating to the House that the amount shown as a deficit demonstrated that the government was almost exactly where it had said it would be in its back-to-balance plan, as set out in the previous year's financial plan. I wouldn't repeat his allegations in detail, but they are set out in the full in the Hansard of the day. I find that the requirement that a matter of breach of privilege was raised at the earliest opportunity and has been met. It was raised during the first day of regular House business in the sitting, after have been identified as possible issue by virtue of statements contained in a report made by the province's Auditor General that was released on February the 6th of this year, which was during the period between the sittings of the House. I do not consider the arguments raised respecting the preparation of the budget and whether there was enough time to revisit it before printing, or that tabling the budget, which contained figures that would be different later if a later revenue forecast were used, to have established a breach of privilege. During a number of question periods since this matter was raised, the current Minister of Finance, the Premier, and the Chairman of the Treasury and Treasury Board have presented a different view on the budget process and what is appropriate in budget preparation. I am ruling that those aspects of the complaint raised are a disagreement between members and do not raise a point of privilege. There was another aspect to the claim by the Leader of the Official Opposition. He took issue with a particular statement made in the House by the former Minister of Finance, which was as follows. In last year's financial plan, the deficit of 2012 and 2013 was projected to be 216 million. In this budget, the projected deficit is 211 million. In other words, we are almost exactly where we said we would be in this point in our back-to-balance plan. This, he argued, was incorrect and misleading. Deliberately misleading the House would be a contempt of the House. The Leader of the Official Opposition stated that the elements that needed to be established by a committee when it is alleged that a member is in contempt of the House for deliberately misleading the House, these are found in O'Brien and Bosk and are as follows. 1, it must be proven that the statement was misleading. 2, it must be established that the member making the statement knew at this time that the statement was incorrect. And 3, that in making the statement, the member intended to mislead the House. It should be pointed out that I do not have to find any of these elements to have existed, which is how some others have characterized this process. Apparently based on a misleading of the reference in the O'Brien and Brost, the duty of the Speaker is limited to assessing whether the point presented is arguable on its fact at first glance. In his comment, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition mentioned a finding in 2002 by a committee of the House of Commons that the Harper government was in contempt of Parliament. In support of his point of privilege, the finding was in relation to a refusal to comply with a requirement to produce documents, which is quite different from an allegation that a member has deliberately misled the House, and which involves a different test. It is not relevant to a question of whether the House has been misled by a member. In considering the points raised by the Leader of the Official Opposition, I have had the benefit of a number of rulings by other speakers, including former Speaker Milligan of the House of Commons and speakers from other provinces, while previously authorities suggested that an allegation that a member has misled the House should be raised as a point of order. I have determined that such allegations have more recently routinely been entertained as questions of privilege in Canadian legislative assemblies. Mango states that a member who is raising a question of privilege entitled to the benefit of the doubt that he or she has raised an arguable point. Mango says that on page 227, in the final analysis in an area of doubt, the Speaker asks simply, does the complaint of appear at first sight to be a breach of privilege? Or to put it shortly, has the member an arguable point? If the Speaker feels any doubt on the question, he should leave it to the House. The Speaker's ruling does not extend to deciding whether a breach of privilege has in fact been committed, that it is a question that must be decided by the House itself. I'm going to restate a small portion of a ruling by a former Speaker Fraser of the House of Commons, in which he was quoting a ruling of his predecessor, Speaker Jerome, found at page 3975 of Hansard for March 21st, 1978, where Speaker Jerome quoted from a report of the United Kingdom Select Committee on Parliamentary Privilege. He stated, it might be inferred that the test applied by the Speaker in deciding whether to give precedent over the orders of the day to be a complaint of a breach of privilege is, does the complaint of appear to be a first glance to be a breach of privilege? Rigorously applied, it would mean that no complaint of a breach of privilege could ever be entertained unless the Speaker was of the opinion that an act or a conduct complaint was a breach of privilege. Borderline cases and arguable ones would be excluded automatically because in such cases, the Speaker could not say that he was an opinion that the act or conduct which was subject of complaint prima facie constituted a breach of privilege. In my submission, the question which the Speaker should ask himself should be, has a member an arguable point? If the Speaker feels any doubt on the question, he should leave it to the House. In ruling whether a member has raised a prima facie case of privilege, the Speaker has to consider, on the evidence presented, whether the facts could amount to a breach of privilege or a contempt of the House. In doing so, the Speaker will also consider representation from other members, including the member who is alleged to have committed the breach or contempt. Speaker Milliken of the House of Commons has said that it is the element of deliberately seeking to mislead the House and not the presentation of information subject to differing interpretation that is the key. In the case I have presented to me as Speaker, no differing interpretation from that presented by the Leader of the Official Opposition, which presented an argument for intent, was offered to the House for its consideration. A statement by the member that he or she did not intend to mislead the House will usually end such a matter. That has not been offered to the House in this matter. In a ruling on April 19, 1999, in a matter in British Columbia that also dealt with a question of budget accuracy, the Speaker noted that the Minister of Finance and Corporate Relations had stated, in deciding to retable the April 1996 budget, I was satisfied that the plan was both plausible and attainable, and had not believed that to be the case. I would not have proceeded with this reintroduction. The Speaker advised that this had been a factor in finding that there was no prima facie case of privilege, stating is another long-established rule which binds not only the Chair but all members of this House, and that the rule that requires all of us, in the absence of incontrovertible evidence, to accept the word of another honourable member. Based on the simple test the Speaker has to follow, which has very low threshold, I've concluded that the Leader of the Official Opposition has presented a technically arguable case that could be considered by a committee if he chooses to make the motion he suggested earlier. And should the House then choose to adopt that motion, I should point out that should the former Minister of Finance advise such a committee he did not intend to mislead the House, it is in my opinion that this would end the matter. The characterization of $27 million difference in last year's budget has been the subject of considerable debate in this House, particularly during question periods and considering the member's point of privilege. I have become concerned that members and possibly others may not be clear on what it means for the Speaker to find that a point of privilege can proceed to the House on any further on a prima facie basis. Under parliamentary procedure, a finding does not in any way suggest a finding by the Speaker that any allegation by the member raising the point of privilege are true or proven. It simply says that at a first glance, the member raising any point of privilege of any type, each of which is seriously allegations, has offered up a version of facts that, if they were later examined and all found to be true after fair deliberation and inquiry by the House, might provide the basis for a finding of breach of privilege. It is important that all members and members of this Parliament, press, media, and public in general have a clear understanding that a prima facie finding by the Speaker does not validate or prove any accusation of a breach of privilege. It allows for the House to refer the matter to committee or otherwise dispose of the accusation in its discretion. O'Brien and Brosk, which cited by the honourable member in his point of privilege, is quite clear on the limited role of the Speaker in examining points of privilege to determine if they merit finding that a prima facie case has been presented for further consideration by the House. It is a procedural role, not a quasi-judicial role, that establishes any finding of fact. O'Brien and Brosk says at page 145, the Speaker's role ought to be explained, and it is that issue before the Speaker is not a finding of fact. It is simply whether, on first impression, the issue that is before the House warrants priority consideration over all other matters and all orders of the day and are before the House. To be clear, on a prima facie case of a breach of parliamentary privilege, it is quite different from a finding of a prima facie case establishing proposition in a court of law like we see played out on television in court dramas. The two words are used in distinctly different ways and do not mean the same thing. A finding of prima facie point of privilege is a procedural step like a question of leave to appeal something in a court system, rather than a factual finding. In fact, some Westminster-style parliaments have stopped using the term because it's decided the term gave an unwarranted impression that the Speaker thought that a breach of privilege or contempt had actually been committed, and now uses a more neutral finding that a question of privilege is involved. The most important point of what I have just said, the bottom line, if you will, is that no member of this House should take or use anything said by the Chair in this ruling as suggesting in any way that the former Minister of Finance has deliberately misled the House with respect to the budget delivery last year. All I have said is that such allegations are important enough on their face to warrant some consideration if the House chooses to do so. And the matter may then be referred to a committee of the House for a proper investigation that will then allow for a full and open airing of both sides of this complicated issue. This allows the House to then examine the allegations made by the Leader of the Official Opposition on the basis that might be in the future be able to proved. They might in the future be able to be proved. At any time, all conditions that are a question of breach of privilege have occurred are then met in the opinion of the House. This is the ruling on this matter. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for your decision. Mr. Speaker, I want to say through you to the House is that on many times the former Finance Minister has said that no way did he intend to mislead anybody in this House or otherwise. So, Mr. Speaker, I would urge all members of this House to vote against this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And it's now open to the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition to propose a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After your ruling, I'd like to propose a motion to the House. Be it resolved that the statements made by the member from Halifax Fairview while Minister of Finance in presenting the budget on April 3rd, 2012 be referred to the Standing Committee on Internal Affairs to determine whether he deliberately misled the House and thus breaching the privileges of the House, and that the committee findings be reported back to the House without delay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to speak briefly in support of the motion that has been made by the Leader of the official opposition. Mr. Speaker, when we look at statements that are made in this House, the most important statements that are made are those that are made around the budget itself, because it is held to the highest standard. Mr. Speaker, our own traditions show that budget matters are a matter of confidence in the legislature. Not by choice, but an automatic matter of confidence, that budget votes don't need to be declared to be a matter of confidence by the government. They are automatically matters of confidence because they are so important. And for that reason, among others, Mr. Speaker, we support the motion to refer this matter to the committee, as the motion says. And Mr. Speaker, I truly hope that all members on both sides of the House support that motion so that the committee can do its job and report back. Because to vote against the motion, Mr. Speaker, and I say this to the members on the government side, to vote against the motion is to not even allow a committee of the House, with the assistance of the House's legal representatives and others, and other experts, including the member in question, to give their views on whether, in fact, a matter of privilege has been raised and has been breached. Without allowing that committee to work, the members that vote against the motion are, in fact, squelching a pursuit of truth and what really happened here. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know many members on the government side, and I can just imagine the pressure that they're under here today. But I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I don't know that the member for Truro-Bible Hill really wants to go home and tell the people there that she voted against allowing the committee to hear whether the budget contained a $27 million error and whether that was disclosed or not. I don't think the member for Lunenburg West wants to go home and do the same thing, Mr. Speaker. So I will not pursue every government member in that way, but I do want to point out what voting no to this motion really entails, which is to not even allow a consideration of whether the privileges of the members in this House have been breached, and ultimately, because this is a document with wide public interest, whether the privileges of all Nova Scotians have been breached, Mr. Speaker. So I will say that my only regret about the motion, before I sit down, my only regret about the motion is that statements about being on track extend far beyond just the member for Halifax Fairview to the entire front bench of the government party, and that's why the committee needs to do its work so all Nova Scotians can finally see what really happened.
Thank you. Thank you. That was it was irrelevant to the motion. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this motion. I feel it is extraordinarily important that this House be permitted to do its work. I have no knowledge whatsoever of the matters under consideration concerning the Minister of Finance's statements. However, I do believe that the House needs to be permitted to do its work. The House is an assembly of people whose statements are taken prima facie to be true. And if, in fact, that is permitted to be questioned outside of the House, then all of the House and the representations which it make are under question. We must, for the integrity of the House, consider this matter within the House first. Thank you.
The motion is on the floor. So all those in favour say aye. We will now have a recorded vote. Are the whips satisfied? Are the whips satisfied? Nope. Yes, thank you. Okay, I will now ask the clerks to take a recorded vote.
Mr. Landry?
No.
Ms. Moore?
No.
Mr. Smith?
No.
Ms. Peterson-Rayfuse?
No.
Mr. Corbett?
No.
Ms. Maureen McDonald?
No.
Mr. Wilson?
No.
Mr. Paris?
No.
Ms. Jennings?
No.
Mr. McDonnell?
No.
Mr. Beliveau? Mr. Boudreau? Ms. Zan?
No.
Ms. Kent?
No.
Ms. Conrad?
No.
Mr. Pereira?
No.
Mr. Parker?
No.
Mr. McKinnon?
No.
Ms. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. Steele? Mr. Epstein?
No.
Mr. Estabrooks? Mr. Press?
No.
Mr. Ramey?
No.
Mr. Skabar?
No.
Mr. Wynot?
No.
Mr. Morton?
No.
Ms. Birdsall?
No.
Mr. Burrell?
No.
Manning McDonald? Mr. Gaudette?
We.
Mr. Glavine?
Yes.
Ms. Whalen?
Yes.
Mr. McNeil?
Yes.
Mr. Sampson?
We.
Mr. Dontremo?
We.
Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. Bain?
Yes.
Mr. Porter?
Yes.
Mr. McMaster?
Yes.
Mr. McLeod?
Yes.
Mr. Oral?
Yes.
Mr. Younger?
Yes.
Ms. Reagan?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
Mr. Caldwell?
Yes.
Mr. Zink?
Yes.
Mr. Theriault?
Yes.
Mr. McClellan?
Yes.
Mr. Churchill?
Yes.
Those in support of the motion 21, those against 25.
Motion is defeated. Daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table the report of the Chief Electoral Officer titled Recommendations for Change to the House of Assembly Act.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm reading this on behalf of the Premier. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia and Boston have a long and proud history of supporting each other in times of need, and whereas last night over 1,000 Nova Scotians gathered in Point Pleasant Park and ran together, united as a silent tribute to the victims of the Boston Marathon bombing, and whereas Nova Scotians remain committed to our special relationship with the people of Boston and will continue to support the city as it rebuilds and heals from this horrible tragedy. Therefore, it be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly join together in honoring the 3 dead and the 180 injured and recognize the message that has become a beacon of hope for people around the world. Boston Strong. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction before I read the resolution.
Most certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, joining us in the East Gallery today are representatives from the Halifax-Dartmouth chapter of the International Association of Administrative Professionals, and I ask them to stand when I read their names. Lisa Young, Patricia Mumbercat, Fiona Marshall, and they're joined by Stephen Stewart, part of our CNS staff assigned to the Public Service Commission, and I ask all members to give them a warm welcome.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy this afternoon's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas administrative professionals play essential roles in coordinating the operations of businesses, government, educational institutions, and other organizations. And whereas the work of administrative professionals requires advanced knowledge and expertise in communications, computer software, office technology, project management, organization, customer service, and other vital management responsibilities. And whereas the week of April 21st to 27th is Administrative Professionals Week, honoring those who make offices work and reflecting the integral role that office professionals play in the workplace. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House acknowledge the valuable contributions made by administrative professionals in workplaces across Nova Scotia and recognize that a well-trained workforce is essential for success in today's business world. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas school principals play a vital and valued role in their schools and communities. And whereas Halifax Regional School Board Principals Karen Cooling of Kennard Junior High School and Karen Weber of Oyster Pond Academy were recognized with the Canada's Outstanding Principals Award by the Learning Partnership. And whereas Karen Cooling and Karen Weber were nominated by their peers, school staff, and community members for the National Award. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate Karen Cooling and Karen Weber on receiving the Outstanding Principals Award and recognize their continued outstanding work as educators and community members. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Promote Cyberbullying Intervention and Parental Responsibility.
The Honourable Member for Inverness begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Promote Cyberbullying Intervention and Parental Responsibility.
Bill number 56, entitled An Act to Promote Cyberbullying Intervention and Parental Responsibility.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill, An Act Respecting Language Schools for International Students.
The Deputy Premier begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Language Schools for International Students.
Bill number 57, entitled An Act Respecting Language Schools for International Students.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her ascension to the throne 60 years ago with her Diamond Jubilee in 2012, and whereas the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal was struck to commemorate this once-in-a-lifetime event, and Canadians who have made a difference or a significant contribution to our country have been presented with this medal throughout this year. And whereas Anne Hebb was honoured with the presentation of a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal at a special ceremony on August 17, 2012, for her exceptional commitment to volunteerism and her dedicated work on behalf of Bedford United Church and her community of Clayton Park West. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Anne Hebb on her Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal and acknowledge with gratitude her dedication and commitment to strengthening our community bonds and helping eliminate discrimination in all its forms. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Argyle.
Monsieur le Président, à une date ultérieure, je demanderai l'adoption de la résolution suivante. Attendu qu'en 2004, le pape Jean-Paul II a conféré le titre de Monseigneur au Père Gérald Leblanc, qui était le curé de l'église Saint-Michel dans son village natal de Wedgeport. Et attendu que Monseigneur Leblanc a eu nombreux postes dans l'archidiocèse de Halifax-Yarmouth, vicaire et curé de Stella Maris Metegan, vicaire de la cathédrale Saint-Ambroise à Yarmouth, pasteur et administrateur de l'église Saint-Pierre de Pamlico-Ouest et l'église de l'Immaculée Conception de Pamlico-Est jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Attendu que Monseigneur Leblanc va célébrer le 50e anniversaire de son ordination le 23 mai à Pamlico-Ouest, entouré par sa famille, ses amis et paroissiennes passés et présents. Par conséquent, qu'il soit résolu que tous les membres de cette Assemblée félicitent Monseigneur Leblanc pour ses 50 ans de dévotion spirituelle et son dévouement à sa vocation. Monsieur le Président, je demande l'adoption de cette résolution sans préavis et sans débat. I hereby give notice on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas in 2004, Pope John Paul II conferred the title of Monsignor to Father Gérald Leblanc, who was at the time parish priest at St. Michael's Church in his native village of Wedgeport. And whereas Monsignor Leblanc has had many postings in the Archdiocese of Halifax-Yarmouth, vicar and pastor of Stella Maris Metegan, vicar of St. Ambrose Cathedral in Yarmouth, pastor and administrator at St. Peter's Church in West Pimlico and Immaculate Conception Church in East Pimlico. And whereas Monsignor Leblanc will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of his ordination on May 23, 2013 in West Pimlico, surrounded by his family, friends, and parishioners past and present. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Monsignor Leblanc for 50 years of spiritual devotion and dedication to his vocation. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on April the 16th, 2013, Commander Hatfield performed a unique science experiment testing the weightlessness of water in its path in space live on board the International Space Station and broadcast to over 1,200 students and onlookers at Lockview High School. And whereas Lockview High's grade 10 and 11 math teacher, Mr. John Monroe, encouraged the two winning students to submit an experiment into the Canadian Science Challenge and was also the MC and host of the special event. And whereas the Canadian Science Challenge was launched last September, inviting students to submit a unique science experiment experiment using only those items already available on board the International Space Station. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating John Munro for his role in this unique experiment, connecting space to the classroom. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Shelley Rector, a teacher at Middleton Regional High School since 1995, and with the Annapolis Valley School Board for 26 years, knows that delivering a quality education happens not only in the classroom, but beyond the confines of the school and out into the community. And whereas field trips involving youth, animals, the Bay of Fundy, and farm life contributed to creating well-rounded students in this dedicated teacher's oceans, science, and agri-foods classes. And whereas Shelley's commitment to sustainability and good stewardship is also evident through her involvement in the Environment Club, Teens Against Poverty, and the Clarence 4-H Club, therefore, it be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly join me in congratulating Middleton Regional High School teacher Shelley Rector on being named the recipient of the 2013 Annapolis Valley Regional School Board Education Week Award in Teaching for a Sustainable Future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice at a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a new novel called Little One, about a brave and intelligent ant and her discovery of the wider world, was written by North City native Phil Organ. And whereas publisher Ron Kaplan said that Mr. Organ holds an up and compelling and often disturbing mirror to the way we humans live, and that the book possesses kernels of terror and kernels of exquisite light. And whereas younger readers will be captivated by Little One's inquisitiveness, kindness, and daring generosity, and adult readers will be challenged by the unique ideas of the book. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Phil Organ on the publication of his book and wish him well as he spends his retirement years writing and painting. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Rita McNeil, Cape Breton's First Lady of Song, was honoured, mourned, and celebrated yesterday in Big Pond, and is a dear friend to me as well as countless other Nova Scotians who worked with her and considered her a musical mentor, a staunch feminist, or were simply fans of her beautiful music and admirers of this great ambassador for Nova Scotia and indeed for Canada. And whereas Rita's daughter, Laura Lewis, son and manager Wade Langham, her grandchildren, and all of her family and friends from Big Pond and beyond watched in awe as Rita showed us her strength and perseverance in the face of great challenges in the pursuit of her dreams. And whereas Rita McNeil will be remembered for her 24 albums, cross-country and international tours to countries like Scotland, Ireland, England, Japan, and Australia, where she became a huge international star, greeted by hundreds of thousands of fans, along with her top-notch band, which included Nova Scotians Al Strickland, Scott McMillan, Dave Burton, Ali Bennett, Clarence Deveau, Al Macumber, Billy McCauley, Lisa McDougall, and Ralph Dillon, who also produced her early albums, including Flying on Your Own, which was her first album to go platinum. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature honors the life of a great Nova Scotian, Rita McNeil, and thanks her family and friends for their loving support of this wonderful icon of Nova Scotian culture. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day
I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers are the backbone of every community in Nova Scotia, and the people of Clare are proud of the many dedicated individuals who give of themselves each day to make our municipality a better place to live. And whereas this year the Clare community has selected one of its outstanding citizens as Volunteer of the Year, and this individual has given much in the way of time and energy to various organizations, and whereas through this individual's genuine warmth and caring towards others, she has become a valuable asset to the organization that she has been involved in. Therefore, be resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate Alice Cleveland of Saint-Martin for being named Clare's Volunteer of the Year for outstanding contribution to her community. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Harry Henderson of Sydney Forks was the recent recipient of the 2013 Anne Holland Memorial Award, and whereas Harry is a very active senior in his community and has been a dedicated volunteer for more than 6 decades, and whereas over the years Harry has been active organizing events, raising funds, and working for every organization, not only in Sydney Forks, but surrounding communities as well. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Harry Henderson on receiving the 2013 Anne Holland Memorial Award and wish him many more active years in the Sydney Forks area. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Cole Harbour resident Paul Mason has been an educator for 21 years, most recently as principal of Ross Road School for the past 3. Whereas Paul, after a brief break for the past 2 seasons, is returning to coaching baseball this summer, a sport he has coached since 1979. And whereas Paul has been coaching minor hockey in Cole Harbour since 1979 as well, where players such as Darren Beals, Joe DePenta, Sean Avery, and Sidney Crosby have honed their skills with his mentorship before embarking on successful professional careers. Therefore, be it resolved that this Nova Scotia House of Assembly thanks Paul Mason for over 3 decades of selfless, dedicated service to his community and to the sports of baseball and hockey, and wishes him well for decades to come. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas James Colford, a resident of East Chesuncook, spent 30-some years working for Maritime Tell and Alliant, and after retiring he became a very successful real estate agent with Century 21. Whereas James has been very active in his community and has volunteered in the Gatesbrook Junior High School Advisory Council, the Birchis Nursing Home, the Chesuncook Food Bank, and he continues to volunteer at St. Genevieve's Church and is still an active in the Chesuncook Recreation Society. And whereas James has researched and written 12-book history of the genealogy of 39 families from the Chesuncook area for the Chesuncook Historical Society, of which he is a member. And copies of the same have been placed in all the local schools, the Muscatauga Harbour Library, as well as Memory Lane Historic Village in Lake Charlotte. Therefore, be resolved that members of this House join me in congratulating James Colford for his tremendous contribution to the families of his community. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future date I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
Whereas the Valley Wildcats, under head coach and Woodville, Hants County native Nick Reno, opened the Canadian Major Midget AAA Hockey Championship in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario last night against the host Stars, North Stars, with another game scheduled for later this afternoon against the Ottawa 67s. And whereas Hants West residents Michael Dill of Windsor and Mikhail Parker from Ashdale are part of the Wildcats, who are the first Valley team since the 1979 Kimfo Wildcats to play in such a prestigious national championship. And whereas Parker proved to be a smooth playmaker all season long for the Wildcats, collecting 17 assists to go along with his 9 goals, while Dill scored 8 goals and added 9 assists in the regular season play. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly take a moment today to recognize the significant achievements accomplished by the Greeno-coached Wildcats in 2012-2013 and the hard-working efforts of both Dill and Parker, and wish them every success in their goal to reach the national championship game to be televised by TSN Sunday afternoon. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Education Week is held from April 21st to 27th to honour teachers and education partners' commitment to their students with this year's theme, Teaching for a Sustainable Future. Whereas Amy McCormick, a grade 4 teacher at the East Richmond Education Centre, has created the Green Team and has worked tirelessly to teach students how to properly sort and recycle in the cafeteria. Whereas Amy and her Green Team have made videos and done presentations to all classes in the school to help promote a healthy environment and stress the importance of reducing, reusing, and recycling waste. Therefore, be it resolved, members of the House of Assembly congratulate East Richmond Education Centre teacher Amy McCormick on receiving an Education Week award for the creation of her Green Team and her dedicated work with students, which is a great example of teaching for a sustainable future. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Megan Martel, daughter of Blair and Muriel Martel of Lardwez, has made an impressive modelling debut. Whereas while a Richmond County student, Megan was photographed last October by Sydney-based photographer John Ratchford, later winning the Ratchford Next Tops model competition and a trip to California. Whereas Megan subsequently entered the Seniors Ignite modeling competition and earned the People's Choice Top Girl distinction after a swell of online support that put her ahead of second-place finisher by more than 800 votes. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Megan Martel on her modeling success and wish her continued success in her studies and future modeling. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the grade 3 to 6 students at the DeBert Elementary School in Colchester North held an informative fair on January 30th and 31st of this year, and whereas the message of anti-bullying in schools focused on the positive, increasing everyone's level of understanding about diversity and acceptance in order to promote better relationships, and whereas 31 topics were presented by grade 3 to 6 students who were well informed to discuss their topics, answer questions, and offer first-hand experiences to their projects. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate the staff of DeBert Elementary School for their commitment to education and to the students for their excellent research and their skill in passing information on to their audience. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
Whereas the Bedford Volunteer Recognition Reception annually recognizes the extensive efforts of the many volunteers who make Bedford a wonderful place in which to live, and whereas 16-year-old Dexter Fennell volunteers his time with a number of organizations, including First Bedford Scouts, where he is active in all its programs, and Bedford United Church, where he has participated in many service initiatives, including Vacation Bible School, the United Church National General Council, and a 10-day service mission in St. John's, Newfoundland. And whereas Dexter was a counselor in training at Camp Abegweit in PEI, organized a food drive to support Feed Nova Scotia while he was still in junior high, and is active in many activities at Charles P. Allen High School, including student political initiatives and musical and theatrical pursuits as well. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Dexter Fennell on being named the 2013 Bedford Youth Volunteer of the Year and thank him for his thoughtful and responsible efforts to better life in Bedford and beyond. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, January 20th, 2013, swim teams from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI competed in the annual Tri-Meet event in Halifax. And whereas Yarmouth's Mary Beth Brown, a grade 7 honors student at Maple Grove Education Center and member of the Yarmouth Y Whitecaps, was the only swimmer representing Yarmouth on the Select Nova Scotia 2013 All-Star team. And whereas Mary Beth Brown placed first in both the 50 fly and the 50 breast, second in the 50 free, was the lead swimmer in the second place 4x50 free relay team, swam the breaststroke leg of the first place 4x50 medley relay team, and Team Nova Scotia won the meet. Therefore, it be resolved that members of this House of Assembly congratulate Yarmouth's Mary Beth Brown on her success as a member of the Nova Scotia 2013 All-Star Swim Team, recognize her for so impressively representing Yarmouth and Nova Scotia, and wish her all the best in what will surely be a very bright future in the pool. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on March the 19th, the Canadian National Powerlifting Championships were held in Richmond, BC, where Digby powerlifter Paul Gidney took the opportunity to bring home the gold. And whereas after competing in 3 powerlifting events, squat, bench press, and deadlift, Paul set a Canadian record in the final event, lifting 290 kilograms, 27.5 kilograms greater than his previous record. And whereas Paul Gidney competed in the 105 kilogram Master 2 division for men over 50, winning the gold, qualifying him for the World Master Powerlifting Championship this September in Orlando, Florida. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate powerlifter Paul Gidney from Digby on his outstanding achievements and wish him many more record-breaking successes. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Douglas McCabe, a resident of Lake Echo, is an artist who has been successfully painting for the past 30 years and who has studied under Sherry Smith of England and also under the late William DeGarth. And whereas he held a class for some 25 junior high school students in his area, introducing them to the arts, teaching them to paint and mix colors for some 3 hours or more each session at no cost to the students. As well, he's illustrated several books, worked as a volunteer for Literacy Nova Scotia, and also taught an adult class to paint at Bloomfield School for a number of years. Whereas He is also one of the 6 founders of the Citizens on Patrol in Lake Echo and stayed with them until his health left him no option but to retire from the organization. Therefore, we resolve the members of this House join me in recognizing Douglas McGabe for the many contributions he has made to his community and to Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Dalhousie Faculty of Agriculture's PMAX Coon Scholarship is worth $2,000, and whereas the scholarship is presented to a Nova Scotia student with a farm background and who is enrolled full-time in a program that demonstrates an interest in working in the agricultural industry, and whereas Emma Ices of DeBert, Colchester North, a 4th-year Bachelor of Science student, was the recipient of the PMAX Coon Scholarship. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Emma Ices for being the recipient of this award and for her continued success with her studies. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Bedford Volunteer Recognition Reception annually recognizes the extensive efforts of the many volunteers who make Bedford a wonderful place in which to live. And whereas Alana Coneen has been a key volunteer and inspiring role model in the Girl Guide movement in Bedford, serving as a Spark Guider, a Brownie Guider, and a guider, and serving as district secretary as well. And whereas Alana has also volunteered for many years with the parents of multiple births, she's the mother of twins, as well as the Bedford Beavers swim team, the Bedford Ringette Association, and Sunnyside Schools. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Alana Coneen on being named the 2013 Bedford Adult Volunteer of the Year and thank her for her inspired and dedicated efforts on behalf of the young people of Bedford. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Prince Andrew Players is the renowned and long-standing drama group of Prince Andrew High School in Dartmouth, and whereas each spring family, friends, and fans mark their calendars for Prince Andrew Players annual productions, which showcase the theatrical talents of students, staff, and community volunteers. And whereas the Prince Andrew Players presented a Midsummer Night's Dream from February 27th to March 2nd, 2013 at the Prince Andrew High Auditorium, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly congratulate the cast and crew of William Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream on their heartening performance and acknowledge the good work of Prince Andrew Players, wishing the players many more years of success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 21st to 27 marks National Volunteer Week, a week to acknowledge and celebrate the many contributions volunteers make 365 days a year. And whereas this year's theme of National Volunteer Week, Passion, Action, Impact, celebrates the attitude volunteers possess to get involved. 14 Wing and Greenwood and area communities are the recipient of the invaluable impact volunteers make. And whereas this recognition evening held at 14 Wing Greenwood is a tribute to those who strengthen our community and make our province a much better and caring place in which to live, therefore be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate, commend all those being honoured on April 24th and encourage continued volunteerism. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2013 Atlantic Karate Championship were held in Fredericton, New Brunswick on February 16, 17, 2013. And whereas Tristan DeVoe from Clare won a gold medal in the girls' Kumite 14-15 division, as well as a silver medal in the girls' Kumite 16-17 division. And whereas Tristan qualified to represent Nova Scotia at the 2013 Canadian National Karate Championship from March 15th to the 17th in Toronto, therefore be resolved that members of this House of Assembly join me in congratulating Tristan for winning her gold and silver medals at the 2012 Atlantic Karate Championship and wish her all the best at the upcoming 2013 Canadian National Karate Championship in Toronto. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day, oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 1:10. We will finish at 2:10. We'll now recognize the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last week a significant amount of evidence was filed with the Utility and Review Board that sharply criticizes Nova Scotia Power and the Maritime Link project. Experts hired by the Consumer Advocate and the Small Business Advocate stated that the Maritime Link is not the lowest long-term cost alternative for ratepayers in the province. And, Mr. Speaker, they offered proof of this assertion. So my question to the Deputy Premier, in light of the evidence filed by these experts, will the NDP government extend the deadline of the hearing before the URB?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you. Someone said good question. Well, he's going to get a good answer. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the answer, quite simply put, Mr. Speaker, is we've answered this question many times, and Mr. Speaker, it is the Muskrat Falls and the Maritime Link is our best solution, and we're going forward with it. And okay, see. See, Mr. Speaker, I've been finally stumped by another Cape Brettoner, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, that's where we're going. And the URB has the tools in which to decide this, and I have every confidence in the board, and they will move this forward in a timely manner that fits their schedule. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Speaker, I think the Deputy Premier might have made a mistake there. He was actually going right beyond the Utility Review Board and suggesting his government was going to push it right through, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't just the Consumer Advocate or the Small Business Advocate, but the Canadian Wind Energy Association as well, an association that is trying to bring business to Nova Scotia. Business that the NDP government is steadfastly against, Mr. Speaker. It's called small business, Mr. Speaker. If it doesn't have Nova Scotia Power, Mr. Speaker, if it doesn't have Nova Scotia Power or corporation attached to its name, the NDP government isn't interested. So my question to the Deputy Premier, why is the NDP government so soundly against independent renewable energy, jobs and investments in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to, I guess, know from the Leader of the Opposition why he's against ComFit, Mr. Speaker. I mean, we've been working with these small utilities for quite some time, these people with the wind energy. I don't know what more we can say on that. We've been working with these people. We've been the party that's moving it forward, not standing in their way, not granting like with the setup of the mirror like the Liberals did, Mr. Speaker. We are helping these folks through ComFit. And, you know, if they don't accept that,
the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this government is doing exactly what Nova Scotia Power tells them to do, Mr. Speaker. Let's be very clear about that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Premier, the Premier, and the entire NDP government are blindly championing a project, Mr. Speaker, that will cost Nova Scotians a minimum of $1.5 billion, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, but they can't tell us what it will mean to power bills until 2017, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they won't extend the deadline of this hearing to ensure that Nova Scotians have a full review of this project and get a full hearing on all the evidence that has been put before the board. So my question to the Premier, why is the NDP government and Nova Scotia Power hiding from the people of this province?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
I don't know what he's talking about hiding, Mr. Speaker. It's at the Utility Review Board. it's part of the name is public. Mr. Speaker, we're there in the public doing it. I don't know why he keeps saying extended deadline, Mr. Speaker. That's because a couple of his friends may see that view. But, Mr. Speaker, the board hasn't asked. Mr. Speaker, we're going forward with it, Mr. Speaker, and we're going forward. I know the member from Dartmouth East is having a hard time keeping that hinge on his tongue together, Mr. Speaker. But the fact is, we're going forward with this, Mr. Speaker. The board is working on it, Mr. Speaker, doing the right thing for all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, and it will be done properly.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we in the PC caucus, we sent a Freedom of Information request to the government asking for detailed correspondence around the decision the government made to not tell Nova Scotians about the $27 million hole they had in their budget. We received 23 pages back, one of which was seriously blacked out, Mr. Speaker. The government has been keeping the decision around not telling people about the $27 million from the people of Nova Scotia, and this is just the latest example. So, and I'll table that, actually, Mr. Speaker, for the Deputy Premier, the blacked out version, and ask him, will he agree today, never mind the Freedom of Information request, will he agree today to provide all of the correspondence around Treasury Board's decision not to tell Nova Scotians about the $27 million mistake?
Hear, hear. Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, you know, I don't know where the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party who does his questions, but I don't know, did him and his caucus sleep through the day that the Deputy Finance Minister was here and went through the whole system with them? Did they not hear it there? They keep saying these things, hiding, Mr. Speaker. We've been very open about this, and we're trying to answer their questions, but they just won't listen.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I was here the day that the Deputy Finance Minister talked about the $27 million, and what she exactly said, and the record will show it, is that the decision to not tell the people of Nova Scotia was made by the Treasury Board, the very board that member who just answered a question is responsible for. Now, I pointed out that when we asked for the presentations that went to Treasury Board, we got a 23-page response. One of those pages was blacked out. Well, I happen to have the other 22 pages with me, Mr. Speaker, and I'll table them, and every single number, every single item in those 22 pages is also blacked out. That's got nothing to do with the Deputy Minister of Finance, who is not elected, and everything to do with the President of the Treasury Board, the Deputy Premier, who is elected, who did make the decision not to tell Nova Scotians why they presented a budget that was missing $27 million. Mr. Speaker, so I'll ask the Deputy Premier, if they truly have nothing to hide in this matter, will he agree to release publicly all of the presentations and correspondence at Treasury Board dealing with the $27 million mistake?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the member's asking these questions, and you know, he knows full well, but these have been answered before, and because of either folks around his bench that have really not much insight into how government works. But, Mr. Speaker, these have been put forward. There was a timeline for the budget to be written, and he knows that. And we've told him that time and time again. That's the reality of it, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, here's a little insight for the Deputy Premier on how government should work. When you make a mistake, and you know it in time to change the budget, you should tell the truth to the people of Nova Scotia. That's how government should work. And what's so ironic is when they were in opposition, the NDP promised more transparency in government. Yet here we have an example where they knowingly presented a budget saying they were on track when in fact they weren't. And when we ask for the information, they don't give it to us or to anyone else, Mr. Speaker, and that is what's wrong. So as long as the Deputy Premier insists on keeping the information away from the people of Nova Scotia, I will ask him, will he apologize to the people of Nova Scotia for keeping them in the dark right up till today?
Order, please. Order. I wonder in that question, did I hear that the honourable member was saying that the Deputy Premier wasn't telling the truth? That is unparliamentary to suggest that.
Mr. Speaker, my question is, will he apologize for not providing Nova Scotians with all the information?
Okay, I'm just hoping that it's imputed motive to say that the honourable member is not telling the truth. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Be quiet. Well, Mr. Speaker, you know what? Maybe we'll play a little game here with the member. Maybe when he apologizes to the Auditor General for when questions he asked us, the Auditor General, and around it, they were fixed, Mr. Speaker. And maybe he should apologize for the AG when the AG looked at our budget this year and gave it a non-qualified thumbs up, Mr. Speaker. That's what he should apologize. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Disagreement, two members. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians were shocked yesterday to learn that Ernest Fenwick McIntosh will be a free man. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts are clearly with his victims and their families at this unfortunate decision. Mr. Speaker, what's even more disappointing is the fact that charges for which Mr. McIntosh was convicted were overturned due to the mishandling of the case by our justice system. While there are clear issues regarding the extradition process, the fact is that it took the Nova Scotia Public Prosecution Service 3 years to bring Mr. McIntosh to court after he was back in Canada. Now my question is, will the Minister of Justice explain to Nova Scotians and to Mr. McIntosh's victims what went wrong here?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I can only imagine how heartbreaking this news was for those who testified about abuse. I do know that Nova Scotians are outraged and they want to know how this could have happened. And I'm very pleased that the Director of Public Prosecutions is doing a review and going to get that report to me, that the RCMP are conducting a review and going to get their report to me. They've advised me that they're going to get that within the next 2 or 3 weeks. So that will put me in a better position to have some context. And we know the historical nature of this file goes back into the 70s, and that the decades that this matter's been in the process raises concerns to everyone. And I do know that tomorrow I'm going to have the opportunity to speak to my counterparts in Ottawa, and this is one of the issues that I'm putting on. And I couldn't agree more with the member's question, is that we do need to take that. And I want to assure all Nova Scotians that this government and this minister respects the point of view that's out there, and that we're on top of this issue.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the facts show that the allegations against Mr. McIntosh came forward in the 1990s. It took over 10 years to extradite him back to Canada. And once in Canada, it took a further 3 years for the Public Prosecution Service here in Nova Scotia to take action. Mr. Speaker, at that point, the Public Prosecution Service had to know that there was going to be a significant risk that Mr. McIntosh was going to argue that justice had been delayed here. Yet they waited 3 full years to finally bring this matter to court. Mr. Speaker, when the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal in December of 2011 overturned the convictions due to the delays that had taken place, I asked the Minister of Justice to immediately order a review of what had taken place here. So my question is, will the Minister of Justice explain why he refused to take action in 2011 to find out why the breakdown in the justice system took place and allowed the 18 counts of indecent assault and gross indecency against 4 boys to be overturned by our courts?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Attorney General, I accept and respect the decision of the Supreme Court, and I'm outraged with the fact that there's the allegations of abuse that have gone forward and are no longer before the court. The fact is that the member clearly pointed out that this case goes back to the 90s and that it's over 10 years old, and that I am going to talk to my federal counterpart tomorrow and discuss this issue and my concerns surrounding that. But I think it's very important as the Attorney General that I have sound facts and information, and those reviews will be very critical to me. And it's important that I don't overreact and make decisions that are not informed. I think it's critical to have information. And the member knows that when the court process is going on, That's not the time to do the review. It's see the findings of the court, get the information, and then conduct and move forward in a very practical manner.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the administration of justice and ensuring that justice is seen to be done in this province, one thing this Minister of Justice will never be accused of is overreacting. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice can't have it both ways. He stands in the House today and says the RCMP are reviewing what they did. The Crown Prosecution Service is reviewing what they did. Yet this is the same minister that created the Serious Incident Review Team to investigate serious incidents following police when he stated it's inappropriate that police would be reviewing themselves when a serious incident takes place. Nova Scotians want a public inquiry, independent, to see exactly what went on here. If the Minister of Justice is going to Ottawa, we'd hope that he'd be giving the same message to his federal counterpart that there should be an independent inquiry as to what went wrong on the federal level when it came to extradition. So my question to the Minister of Justice today, on behalf of all Nova Scotians who you've acknowledged are outraged, and on behalf of the victims who were proven to be correct by our courts, will you order a public, independent inquiry into the Fenwick-McIntosh case?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for acknowledging that I conduct my business in a very practical, responsible, respectful manner. So thank you for that comment. In regards to, I want to reiterate that I will be speaking to my federal counterpart and that I will get the sufficient information so that when decisions are made, Nova Scotians have confidence that they're well informed and they carry out. So I do thank the member for raising the question, and I want to end by saying that in my previous life as an investigator and looking people in the eye that have been a victim or abused, I understand the conflict that they're in, and I understand in this case those that have alleged abuse and went through the system, how they must feel, and I respect that and will ensure that as I move forward that their conflict will be acknowledged and will be addressed.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, Nova Scotians have been calling on this government to conduct a full public inquiry into the alleged abuses at the Nova Scotia Home for Colour Children since last year. Initially, the Premier said they couldn't act while civil and criminal cases are being investigated or before the courts. That has since passed, Mr. Speaker, and the government has had time to act. It has been years, Mr. Speaker, that people have been waiting to bring their stories forward and to start the healing. So my question to the Deputy Premier, why has this government denied Nova Scotians a public inquiry into the alleged abuses at the Nova Scotia Home for Coloured Children?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for that, but I would ask that the Minister of Justice answer that question on behalf of the government.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I know that this is a long, emotional process, and I understand that the former residents want closure. This case has been going on for many years under successive governments. This government has done more than any other government to give former residents a chance to have their voice, and we will continue to move that process forward. And the consultation has been wide amongst the community and stakeholders on this issue, and we're listening.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's been almost 4 years. It's time to stop listening and start acting, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, in the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, this government committed to a hearing process for people to share their stories. Former residents have called on this government for an inquiry, not a panel, and have asked that there be a restorative element of action taken by government so that we can learn from this tragedy and do better by our fellow citizens. So my question for the Deputy Premier, will the Deputy Premier tell those individuals who continue to carry the weight of abuses suffered at the home why his government has been inactive in their request for an inquiry?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, to the leader of the Liberal Party, you know, this government's been anything but inactive. Mr. Speaker, we've been dialoguing with the folks at the are at the home and the folks. So, Mr. Speaker, we've been very proactive with them, and we've been discussing it. And in the speaker, or in the member's question, Mr. Speaker, we've been entering in dialogues with those folks. So we're trying to move this file forward. I understand, you know, these types of instances are very, very emotional, and that we are trying to proceed as carefully and as judiciously as possible with the respect of the perceived victims, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Speaker, the government has been talking, Mr. Speaker, to residents of the Home for Colored Children, Mr. Speaker, but they're not listening to them, Mr. Speaker. Even in the statement, Mr. Speaker, even in their statement, Mr. Speaker, even in their statement from the speech from the throne, Mr. Speaker, they alleged that this was being supported, Mr. Speaker, by the victims, Mr. Speaker, when in actual fact, if anyone listened to the dialogue that happened outside of this House, that is absolutely false, Mr. Speaker. The victims, Mr. Speaker, in this case want a public inquiry. Mr. Speaker, why will the Deputy Premier tell those residents who are looking to this government to act and to right a wrong why his government is just sitting, Mr. Speaker, on this file?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's confusing because, Mr. Speaker, in part of his question, he rolls up a litany of things that we are doing, Mr. Speaker, to resolve this. And then he denies it over here. Mr. Speaker, we are doing something by the mere fact if he just listened to his own question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. The people who worked on the Fenwick-McIntosh case already know exactly why they failed to bring this man before the courts. We don't. There is no need to wait weeks for an internal review. The minister could have completed his review long ago. He's been aware for at least a year that there were serious questions around the delay of the prosecution of McIntosh, questions raised in public by those who courageously came forward to tell their stories of abuse, and also by the Court of Appeal. My question, would the minister show that he has a heart and that he cares about what the victims of abuse went through and explain the result of his internal review by the end of this week?
Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you. And I want to thank the member for raising the question because obviously he missed the opposition party asking the question earlier and the answer that I gave. So I'm not so sure why he didn't hear it, but I'll repeat it. I can't stress enough from a personal perspective that my heart goes clearly out to all those that brought allegations forward before the court in the outcome that's occurred for them. As the Attorney General, I respect the decisions of the Supreme Court and their decision. I want to read the court's decision more in depth. As well, I want to get the direct feedback from the public prosecutions and from the RCMP. I don't think it would have been appropriate for me to ask for that prior to getting the decision of the court and the outcome while that process is on. Everybody knows that that is a requirement within my office. So unequivocally, since he raised the question about having a heart, I want to look people straight in the eye. I spent a lifetime dealing with these issues, and I'm committed to the people of Nova Scotia and anyone that is abused.
The Honourable Member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, these matters could have been reviewed internally by the minister over the past year. But I want to go beyond this idea of an internal review, because can we really trust those who failed to bring McIntosh to court to fairly review themselves? We need an independent review. Now, the minister has officials in Ottawa as we speak offering to help on a bill for victims' rights, a victim's bill of rights. Yet back home, he plans to do an internal review. And it begs the question, Mr. Speaker, what is the goal of the minister? This minister represents the justice system in Nova Scotia. Can't he do something more than just bury this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Well, thank you to the member for the question, and I'm very pleased that he asked that question and framed it that way, because on the issue of victims, is something that I had planned for some time to meet with my colleagues across the country. We're meeting in Ottawa tomorrow with my federal counterpart to address that. It's an issue that's been on our minds and something that I've been working on for some time. So I do take this seriously. Nova Scotia is not an island the last time I checked, although you've been from Cape Breton, your part is. And we do not act alone. On these types of issues, we consult with our other ministers of justice across the country in the federal, provincial, territorial process. That's what's there. I have a meeting directly to speak to the federal minister. Short of going to the Prime Minister, that's as high as we can go on the issue. It's dialogue that we have been ongoing. It is timely that the court decision has come back and I'm able to discuss these direct issues with the federal minister, and I hope that with his contacts in Ottawa that he shares his point of view and his party's point of view, so that when I am there that we have a consensus from Nova Scotia that we're deeply concerned about this and that we have to work in conjunction with our federal counterparts and our other provincial territorial to set good policy and the rule of law enforced across the province.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've heard a lot of talk, but I haven't heard anything, the minister say anything about doing an independent review. Now, I know the people who have been affected by this want an independent review. And I think our actions in this legislature speak volumes about where we stand on matters. Now, an independent review with the input from victims will verify whether the Public Prosecution Service is actually telling the truth. Will the minister do the right thing and not only ask for that Public Prosecution Service to deliver their report by the end of this week, but also engage a full independent review to see what went wrong, to honor the bravery of the victims who came forward to tell their stories?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
You know, I think Nova Scotians expect that the Attorney General would get sufficient information and have the knowledge and background on events that have occurred. And when we talk about the truth, you as a member may not have believe in the public prosecutions. They're an independent body from government, the politician from directing them. There's a way and a method to assess and question them. And we are going to get to the bottom of this, as well as that there's a huge component of this with the federal government. And I think it's critical that I meet and have dialogue with the federal government. In addition, looking at how this issue was handled by previous administrations may be an area that may need that. But when the member talks about truth, I have a lot of concern when it comes from that party on these types of issues.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre has met with members of this government to discuss the sexual assault nurse examiner program, the shortage of sexual assault counsellors across the province, and the chronic underfunding of sexual assault services. In the wake of recent news reports, the number of calls to the centre has increased. More people are reaching out for support and are turning to the centre, the very centre that was underfunded in the first place, and where people have to wait 6 months for counselling services because of understaffing. My question is to the Deputy Premier. The Avalon Centre is calling for emergency funding to deal with the onslaught of calls. Will you commit to providing the centre with emergency funding?
The Honourable, the Deputy Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think all parties will agree that no matter who sits on this side of the table, on the side of the floor, supports the work of the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre. But I would ask the minister responsible if she could answer it in more fullness for the member.
The Honourable Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start my my answer by commending all those who provide support services to women and girls in this province for the excellent work that they have done over many, many years. And certainly the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre is part of that network. One thing we want to do is to make sure that the changes that happen in this province are done so they provide a comprehensive, coordinated support infrastructure across this province. Currently, the province supports the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre to the tune of about $640,000. Is this enough money for those services? Probably not. But we want to make sure that the changes or any improvements that we make are done to support all women in this province. So, for example, there's spotty coverage. In some regions of this province, it's fairly good support. In other areas, they don't have access to those programs and services. So this isn't a time to look necessarily at the mandate and work of one organization. We are trying to be strategic and make sure that we bring all the organizations together to have more coverage across Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Avalon Sexual Assault Centre submitted a needs assessment in 2008. So that was 5 years ago. 5 years and no response to recommendations from government. It took a public tragedy for this government to wake up to the sexual assault crisis in this province. It's been 5 years and we still have the highest rates of sexual assaults in the country and the lowest conviction rates. The need for funding is not a new phenomenon. Will the Deputy Premier commit to sustainable funding for sexual assault services across the province?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the member, I believe that the minister had answered that in her previous question, but again, for more clarity, I'll ask the minister responsible to answer the question.
The honourable minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to stand in this chamber and defend the status quo. Have we done enough and have we done it fast enough? The answer is no. But there is a renewed commitment, I think, right across this province that as we hear more and more incidents of sexual violence against women and girls in this province, that we have to do something. There's enough blame to go around. I think every single individual in this province can probably think of ways that they could have intervened or made life better for girls and women. We are committed to make a change this time, and we're going to be strategic. It's not a matter of just adding money. We have to work together, and we're going to look at both aspects of that. I have already met with the Executive Director of the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre. I'm going to visit their centre and meet with her and some of the counsellors leadership team from that centre to get a better sense of what the additional workload might be. So the request is under active consideration, but we need to do it in concert with all the other changes that we plan to make. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The needs assessment was submitted to the former government in 2008. There was also another report submitted the year before about building a sane network for Nova Scotia. That was submitted in 2007. The blueprint for this has been in the government hands since it was elected. I will table that report. The Avalon Sexual Assault Centre has been asking for help to meet the needs of its clients long before this current crisis. Now the government says we're going to act because of this crisis, but the fact remains that this organization has been underfunded for a long time, and it took this government a national tragedy, a national embarrassment to wake up. This government has been sitting on recommendations for action the entire time they've been in office. Why should Nova Scotians trust that this government's going to do anything different now?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the member wants to know about issues that happened in 08, maybe she can ask the member sitting to her left. But Mr. Speaker, in minus of that, I'm going to her right. But Mr. Speaker, but Mr. Speaker, I would like to allow the Minister for Status of Women to answer that.
The Honourable Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm not going to stand here and defend the status quo. It's not good enough. We all know that, and we're going to move forward on this. But we have to do it in a way that provides excellent or much better coverage in terms of the whole continuum: prevention of sexual violence, interventions, supports, treatment afterwards. There's a whole series of actions and supports that have to happen, and it has to happen at all levels of government, and there has to be support across our communities. And so that's what I've been doing over the past week, talking to municipal councillors and mayors and wardens, talking to community leaders. There has to be a change of attitude and commitment on behalf of all of us, every single individual. And I would say that the change starts with us. So, you know, I've had a chance to meet with the two opposition leaders. I really appreciate their offers of help. I have not met one person who's approached me in the last week and a half who hasn't said, we have to do better. What can I do to help? So let's take that interest, that energy, that spotlight on this issue and make sure that there's improved situation for women and girls in this province. The onus is on all of us, not any particular government. Thank you.
The Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Premier. Throughout our questioning of the government about their budget with the $27 million hole in it, the Deputy Premier and others have consistently said that the reason is simply due to updating of schedules and the need for a cutoff date where they can't accept any new information, and not actually an error in the budget. But, Mr. Speaker, that's not what the Auditor General says. From his own report, and I quote, he says that the error resulted from two main factors. One, a change in the calculation to adjust calendar year revenues determined by revenue models to fiscal year revenues. In other words, they were using the wrong year-end compared to what the province needs. An actual error, not a matter of just an update to the schedule. And so I'll ask the Deputy Premier if he wants to reconsider his previous defences and tell Nova Scotians that, in fact, there was an error, a real error, not a cutoff error in the budget that could have been fixed. And I'll table the schedule for the Deputy Premier.
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, you know, they try as he will, the leader of the Conservative Party just won't listen. It's his problem, Mr. Speaker. We've told him over and over and over again, Mr. Speaker, there was no error, so to speak, as he likes to put it, Mr. Speaker. The reality was that there was a filing date. We met it. We did the right thing, and he just won't accept it.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, like all Nova Scotians, I've been listening very carefully, and I still don't hear the proper answer. And for that reason, I would rather listen to the advice of the Auditor General in his own report instead of the Deputy Premier, because the Auditor General says very clearly it's an error, that the Treasury Board used the wrong information with the wrong year end, and they knew it, and the difference was $27 million, and they kept it to themselves. I heard the Auditor General say that, and he put it in writing. That's what's in dispute here, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Premier had an opportunity to do the right thing, and that is to tell Nova Scotians what happened, to provide that information openly. And yet when we asked for the information, he blanked out 22.5 out of 23 pages. Well, that's not good enough, Mr. Speaker, so we're going to continue to ask, will he finally do the right thing and give Nova Scotians all the information his department has on the $27 million, like we've been asking, and then they can decide for themselves who is listening to them and who isn't?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, they have all the information. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, here's a piece of information that we do have. The current Finance Minister, in an interview outside this chamber, said, and I quote, that $27 million is not a lot of money. In fact, it would not matter one iota to the people of Nova Scotia. Well, here's a news flash. $27 million is a lot of money. You can do a lot of good with $27 million. Like support the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre and others like it. That's something that could be done, along with a whole lot of other things. And so I'll ask the Deputy Premier, does he agree with the Minister of Finance that $27 million doesn't matter one iota? Are they really that out of touch?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
What I do agree with, Mr. Speaker, is I agree with later today, we will be voting on a balanced budget, a budget that's in surplus, and a budget that was brought in by this finance minister, one of the best finance ministers this province has ever seen, Mr. Speaker. That's what I believe.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you for the applause. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Deputy Premier. The government has chosen to tie its hopes and dreams to a project in Newfoundland rather than looking at the evidence which has now overwhelmingly been submitted that shows that building out the renewable energy system in Nova Scotia would be cheaper for ratepayers, would provide longer-term stability, and would provide better supply protection. Mr. Speaker, let's be clear here. All of the evidence, with the exception of the evidence filed by the government and by Nova Scotia Power, says independently that built in Nova Scotia renewable energy would be cheaper for ratepayers. Mr. Speaker, the Utility and Review Board's own, consultant for the Consumer Advocate said, quote, "We conclude the analysis was faulty, lacking in robustness, incompletely documented, and biased to favour the applicant's desired outcome." That of the government's and Nova Scotia Power's information. Then the board's own consultant called the information submitted by the province and by Nova Scotia Power Orwellian, and I will table that. Mr. Speaker, why is the Deputy Premier and the NDP government refusing to look at local homegrown renewable energy projects as an alternative to Muskrat Falls?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, you know, that member never ceases to amaze me, you know. I'm sure sometime I always think his name should be Grimm for the fairy tales, Mr. Speaker. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is this. Has he not heard of the ComFit plan? Mr. Speaker, we've been introducing locally produced energy throughout this province. The likes no one has ever seen in this province before by either one of those governments, Mr. Speaker. We do support local homegrown energy projects, Mr. Speaker, and that's the reality. We're not tying ourselves to Quebec Hydro, Mr. Speaker. We see it as an all-inclusive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't know the Deputy Premier was running for re-election in Newfoundland to create jobs there. I thought he wanted jobs in Nova Scotia. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Premier mentioned the ComFit. The Deputy Premier mentioned the ComFit program, so let's talk about the ComFit program. Mr. Speaker, we certainly haven't forgot about ComFit, but the Energy Minister and the government have. In fact, in another consultant's report done for the board by Synapse, which I'll table, says that the Nova Scotia government and Nova Scotia Power forgot to include the ComFit projects in their analysis of available energy. So who's forgetting about ComFit now? Mr. Speaker, why would the government on the one hand celebrate ComFit projects publicly and on the other hand allow the Nova Scotia Power and its own consultant to ignore the impact the ComFit projects have on the financial viability of the Maritime Link?
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Okay, I hear, Mr. Speaker, I hear the junior woodchuck from over in Yarmouth melting off over there. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll try to please him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
that word is unparliamentary.
Is it? Well, if it is,
Junior woodchuck.
Junior. Okay, oh my goodness, Mr. Speaker. Here I thought you're a friend of wildlife, but Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the term that's offensive to this House, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
But you know what, Mr. Speaker? If I was to stand for election in Newfoundland, they would say, "Way to go, Frankie boy. You represent the people of Atlantic Canada. You support a made in Atlantic Canada solution, not like the Liberals in Nova Scotia who turn their backs on Atlantic Canadians." That's what they would say to me, Mr. Speaker.
honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the Deputy Premier ran for election in Newfoundland, they would say, thank you for throwing Nova Scotians under the bus so we could get all the economic investment. You know, Mr. Speaker, every single study filed with the board, with the exception of the government's one in Nova Scotia Powers, says it is not the lowest cost alternative. Mr. Speaker, the NDP likes to reference Mr. Dalton in his report, and Mr. Dalton says, and we tabled that earlier, the two analyses support the same finding, that the Maritime Link project is the lowest cost alternative available to Nova Scotia. But the two studies are Nova Scotia Powers and his own initial study. Mr. Speaker, will the Deputy Premier please explain how it is that the government study using data supplied by Nova Scotia Power, data already called faulty, incompletely documented, and biased to favour the applicant, by other experts can come to such a radically different conclusion on the financial merits of the project than all of the other independent experts working independently of one another.
Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's funny. I make reference to a wildlife animal and it's out of order, and then I listen to the alleged facts in his question, Mr. Speaker. So sometimes the rules are bewildering, Mr. Speaker. But I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, what I got to say. I want to read back from the platform in 2009. From the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, and I will, like the member from Dartmouth East, table. And I quote from their document, Mr. Speaker, Atlantic Canada's energy sources, such as Newfoundland's Lower Churchill Hydro project, are potential sources of renewable energy. We must ensure that their economic and environmental benefits are shared by all Atlantic Canadians. We can only achieve this goal through enhanced focus and investment in transmission infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, what happened? Thank you.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Oh, that's you, Percy.
Since 2009, Mr. Speaker, I've stood in my place and asked the Minister on multiple occasions for updates regarding the EastLink issues that customers in my area continue to have with their high-speed connection, and for some who are just not able to be connected. Can the Minister update us this afternoon on how many of these customers are still having trouble with or getting connected to high-speed internet service?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can say this is that we certainly as a government sympathize with all of Nova Scotians who are not connected. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, we remained one of the most connected jurisdictions in all of in the entire world. We've got about 99. We're at 99.9% connected. We have less than 800 now that require the hard-to-reach places, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the Minister, Serge Paquette has been calling EastLink so much that they won't even take his calls any longer, yet they don't mind billing him for service he's not receiving. Mr. Paquette lives directly beside the very tower that provides his so-called high-speed service. Yet, as you will see from the data, and I'll table that data, Mr. Speaker, he gets little to no service, and this is broken right down by the hour. And in conversation with those at EastLink, there are some questions being raised about the hardware at the tower site. Would the Minister commit to contacting EastLink, given that the government and taxpayers have a contract with them to provide high-speed internet service, and ensure that the appropriate, most up-to-date hardware is in place to provide the necessary service?
Honourable the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would request that the member submit the name and phone number and the address of that constituent, and I can guarantee you is that somebody in our broadband unit will be in touch with the individual, and there also will be a follow-up telephone conversation with the service provider, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that commitment. Mr. Paquette will be pleased to once again try and get some results with this issue. Mr. Speaker, there are many people who are and have been paying for high-speed internet, like Mr. Biquette, another service that they have just not been receiving, and the significant amount of data that I just tabled will actually reflect what that truly represents. My question to the Minister, will he stand with the people in this situation and contact Eastlink in an effort to see that these customers are reimbursed for all the service they have not been provided, given that they have now paid for it twice, both as taxpayers and as customers?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what this minister and what this government will commit to is we will commit to reaching out, contacting those constituents. And one of the things that we, in those hard-to-reach places, we've asked the service providers. They are right now doing some experimentation. It's been in place now for several weeks, and we're hoping that service providers do have a solution, and I say hoping that they have a solution for those hard to reach places. I can say, Mr. Speaker, in all sincerity, we do feel for those that don't have access, and we are doing what we can on our end to ensure that all Nova Scotians have access to high-speed internet.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for Communications Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, the amount of money that this government has spent on ad campaigns while cutting and other needed services has many Nova Scotians shaking their head. For example, when it comes to public education, the NDP government cut $76 million out of classrooms, resulting in 700 teacher cuts and a wait list of over 2,000 kids trying to access speech pathology and child psychology services. So my question for the Minister responsible for Communications Nova Scotia, would he tell members of the House how much his government spent on education advertising while the government was slashing education spending and keeping us among the lowest per student funding in Canada?
It's the Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to admit, I don't have that information in front of me. I have it prepared for the estimates. But I do know that it is critical that Nova Scotians understand what government is doing and why. And certainly the changes and improvements in our education system, it's very important, critical information that needs to be shared with Nova Scotians so that parents and guardians better understand how they can support